It's really, really frustrating when you put time and effort into creative and it just doesn't work, okay? But let me make the case that it actually works better than you think to do this. And that is by first introducing something. There's a different approach here than using a randomized controlled trial. Because a randomized controlled trial, by definition, assumes that you know nothing about the potential outcome that you are trying to drive, right? It basically says, we're going to take these two groups, assume we know nothing about them, make them as similar to each other as possible, and then see the results. Change one thing, right? You change one detail. In this case, it would be the ad. They each get served ads, but they change one detail. Maybe the most sort of tightest version of this, and I'm certainly not saying you should do this, would be they get the same ad, but group A gets headline A and group B gets headline B. This is like the kind of A/B test you run on your website all the time, a lot, for a lot of brands. Test these individual little variants and you change that one little detail and then you see how they perform, okay? That is one way of setting up a test, but there is another way of doing this, which is saying, instead of doing that, we are not going to assume we know nothing about either one of these groups and about either one, how they're going to perform. Instead, we are going to assume that some things are true in advance in both groups. Okay. And because some things are true in advance, we can apply that knowledge to a forecast of what we think will happen with both. So we're not going to wait for a holdout test. We're instead going to use the knowledge we have to forecast what's going to happen next. This is probabilistic forecasting, and it relates back the idea. I mentioned the idea that it's Bayesian earlier because it relates back to the idea of Bayes' theorem. There's this idea of priors, which is this idea that in your test and in your forecast, there are these priors, these prior beliefs, these prior ideas that probably hold true in the future as well. And those priors get adjusted over time, but that's not the case. And so let me give you one such example, right? You might assume, okay, coming in to a forecast that you are going to convert, let's just say, 4% of your clicks, okay? And that might be a prior, essentially an expected conversion rate, okay, off of the clicks that you drive that is going to go in. So as Meta starts to scale your ads, it is assuming, and I've mentioned this concept before, it starts with a prior that you're going to have a 4% conversion rate on those ads. Now, it's going to adjust that prior in real time as it learns, okay? But that concept is that it's going to probabilistically forecast the performance of your ads based on its expected conversion rate, which is the prior coming in advance. Now, why does it have that expected conversion rate? I recently had a month where I made 3,500 ads in 1 month for 5 clients. And when I say I made them, what I really mean is that my team made them, and that would have been impossible without my friends at Behind the Scenes Studio. Behind the Scenes Studio is a meta ads focused design and edit agency based in the Philippines. So it's incredibly affordable. People with deep talent, and in fact have been trained in the way of thinking about meta ads that I talk about on this podcast all the time, which is building lots of volume, lots of variance for every ad. And so they're well set up to execute a great meta ads design and edit strategy, giving you beautiful ads that you or your clients will love at serious scale. Go to btsstudio.co to work with the same creative teams that I work with in my business to power yours. It has a whole bunch of clicks before and a whole bunch of data before, and it knows that down probably to the level of the customer and to certain psychographic and demographic details and all these things and placement details, how much does that 4% conversion rate probably, here's what I'm saying, that is probably actually made up of a lot of small conversion rates that roll up into it, right? So a Facebook desktop click, Meta would expect to perform really differently. It would have a prior. It would perform really, and let's call it from a 35-year-old rich woman, okay? That is going to perform really differently than let's say a Facebook stories click. So that's mobile now. And let's call it from let's call it a 22-year-old male college student who doesn't have a job. Okay. Those two clicks, Meta is going to expect to perform really differently, and it should. It has a lot of information to assume that it's going to do that. And as Meta delivers your ads, it is bringing that information into the delivery of the ads, scaling and amplifying and suppressing based on the likely outcomes down to all of these different levels. Now, Meta doesn't tell us that exactly, but this is really intuitive and really clear from the data that happens. This is why it basically never works for you to, in advance, go exclude placements and see if you can get better performance. It's sometimes frustrating. You'll see, oh my gosh, we're getting all this delivery on Instagram stories and it's not converting at all. What if I just eliminate that? right? Every time I've ever done that, and I haven't done that for a long time, but a few years ago when I would have done that sort of thing, right? It actually makes the performance worse, not better. And it's because Meta actually has more information about the likely performance next on your ads. And that idea, the likely performance next, is the notion of probabilistic forecasting. Now, forecasting the future, predicting the future, is by definition impossible. You will never get it exactly right, but doing it probabilistically is what actually makes sense. If you want to get your head around this idea, go back and read Nate Silver's book, The Signal and the Noise, and it will help you think through the way that good forecasting works in the world and about how we've tried to apply that across a lot of different domains. It's a really good book, really helpful, really engaging. You'll like it. If you want to get your head more around what I'm talking about, go read that book. Okay. So there's this notion of probabilistic forecasting, and basically what is happening there is that Meta is taking a bunch of information it has in advance and using that to forecast the future, so that it can deliver your ads with the most likely outcomes relative to what you have told it. So if you're running manual bids, it is going to deliver as much spend as it can. Let's say you set a $100 cost cap, right, or a $100 bid cap. Let's call it a cost cap, $100 cost cap. So it's going to try and get you an average of $100, okay? And if in that case, it's going to use a bunch of signals to say, here's what is most likely to happen. And Meta tells you, we're not guaranteeing you that you're going to get a $100 CAC here. We're going to instead just say, most likely on average, we're going to aim for this CAC, okay? And so it's and Meta is telling you there that this is probabilistic. That means it is a possible outcome, but a probable outcome based on the information that it has available to it. But of course, again, the future is unpredictable, and sometimes the future is not like the past in a way that makes this difficult, and etc. Predicting the future is really hard, right? And so you build models, and Meta has built a model clearly in their machine learning that does this for you. Okay, now all of that said, here's the thing that you probably need to understand more deeply as a media buyer if you want to think through this a little bit more. And it's this. I just said that the expected conversion rate on 100 clicks, let's say, would be 4 purchases for a 4% conversion rate. Like that's the example I just gave, okay? But clicks are not the only information that Meta has. If Meta had to get 100 clicks or 200 clicks or whatever to make a probabilistic forecast of the performance of an ad, it would require spending a bunch of money on that ad. Let's say you get a $2 cost per click, which wouldn't be crazy in today's world, okay? If that is the case, then to get 100 clicks, right, Meta has to spend $200 on the ad, and that would get it 100 clicks. And let's say your actual conversion rate is 4% on that. It's going to take a long time for Meta to get enough clicks to validate that conversion rate is quote unquote real. There's actually a lot of statistical noise in 100 clicks. What happens if your true conversion rate is actually 5%, but in those first 100 clicks, you happen to only get 4 purchases, not for any particular reason, but just because that's just how it goes. There's like random distribution of outcomes in smaller samples, and that's how it goes, okay? So you get 4 purchases instead of 5. If you had held and you'd kept spending, you'd actually get a 5% conversion rate at scale. Well, for Meta to validate that conversion rate is at all real, especially across all these different types of people, all these placements, etc., it would have to spend huge, tremendous amounts of money to then build a forecast for your ad, okay? But what if it doesn't need 100 clicks to make that decision because it has some other information about how people are engaging with your ads, and that information predicts the clicks, which predicts the purchases, okay? So for example, if 100 clicks could reasonably predict a 4% conversion rate, what if, let's see, what would make that, I think, I'm trying to think through some math in my head right now. Okay, go like this. If 100 clicks reasonably predicts a 4% conversion rate, all right, then what would happen if you had a 1% click-through rate on your ads? That would mean that for every 100 impressions that you get, okay, that would get you 100 clicks. And so now Meta could maybe gather your click-through rate based off of, let's say, to get to 100 clicks, okay, then it could actually do that on 10,000 impressions. But what if it doesn't need 10,000 impressions to get an expected click-through rate? What if actually on 1,000 impressions, you got 10 clicks and that was a relatively strong signal? And what if actually there was something before clicks that signaled something more significant? And so now I want to talk about the idea of micro engagements. If I lost you for a second there, hang with me, okay? Every marketer understands the idea of a micro conversion, all right, which is like the little step somebody takes before they make a purchase, right? The sort of obvious one here to be like an add to cart. We would consider an add to cart a micro conversion. This is a term I've heard thrown around for a long time. Micro-conversion is some step that that a user takes, some action they take that is on the way to the full conversion you care about. Okay, so add to cart. Another classic one is like an email capture. An email capture is a conversion. A user took a real action at that point. They actually gave you some information about themselves. And so sometimes marketers have thought in terms of how do we generate micro-conversions on the way to conversions as a way of sort of guiding somebody through the purchase process and getting them to take one little step after another.